Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Sandy from Lightning Tools, and we'd like to welcome our very special guest today, Melissa Hubbard. Melissa is a Business Applications and Office Apps and Services MVP from the Washington, D.C. area, and she's a Microsoft Teams expert, having written a book about it called Mastering Microsoft Teams. And she's here today to talk to us about governance planning. So thank you very much for joining us, Melissa.
Thanks, Sandy. Thank you for having me. And of course, my cuckoo clock is going to go off as soon as I start talking. So if you hear birds, that's why. All right, so let me go ahead and switch my slide here. Okay. And thank you for the great introduction, Sandy. I think I don't have anything else to add.
Oh, you know what?
But
Actually, I need to add something I forgot. If you have questions, by the way, we'll have a Q&A segment at the end, and so then we'll allow you to unmute yourself, or we'll unmute you, and you can ask any questions that you want. We'll allow time for that. Sorry. Thanks.
yes, yeah, please ask questions. So one thing I will add about my background is that I started off in SharePoint consulting with the US government. So a lot of the work that I did, I came in on some pretty gnarly SharePoint deployments, and I've seen a lot of different spectrums of governance and user adoption for SharePoint. So when Teams was very first released in preview, I started using Teams, and I started looking underneath and seeing that it uses SharePoint site collections for each team. I started thinking about teams and channels and information architecture and how this would work. And it really made me start to focus in on Teams governance, because I saw that this tool could provide such huge value for organizations as far as collaboration in the digital workplace. I thought, we should try to get it right with Teams. We should try to do a better job, because I feel so many organizations suffered in their SharePoint deployments because of poor governance, and that's directly related with your user adoption as well. And also, my Twitter handle and my email are there. Feel free to contact me if you have any follow-up questions or at any time. So I'd also like to introduce my assistant. This is my cat, Shakespeare. And a little bit about the company that I work for. I am in the DC area, so I no longer do many government projects, but I work for a company called Withum Digital, and we primarily work with Microsoft technology. We do a lot of cloud deployments. We've got very experienced consultants, four MVPs, including myself, on staff, and 16 years as Microsoft Gold Partner. We've really been focusing in on Microsoft Teams as well as business process automation. So why Microsoft Teams? Why do we care? Why are we here today to talk about Microsoft Teams? Why is there so much hype around this product? So I like to think of Microsoft Teams as the answer to the changing modern workplace needs. So here's some statistics just to get us thinking about that. People are on 4 times as many devices per year as in the past. So we've got our tablets, we've got our work laptops, we've got our phones. We want to be working on all of these devices, depending on where we are and what we're doing. So 72% of workers will be working remotely in some fashion by 2020. So I primarily work from home, and so does the rest of my team. We need to stay in touch with each other. We need to be working as effectively, if not more effectively, than we would be if we were sitting at desks right next to each other in the office. There's global teams. People are connecting from all over the world and need to work and collaborate with one another, which wasn't as much in the past that way. We're also on more teams. So, I work in consulting, so I have a lot of different teams depending on the project I'm working on and who the client is. But even in other organizations that aren't doing consulting, people are getting pulled in different things. A lot of like cross-functional type of efforts. You're not just working with the same, few people all day. Also, a lot of us have gotten really used to using social networking and social tools, and we want to bring those into our workplace because we've gotten used to communicating with each other in that way. We've got 5 generations in the workplace working together, and 80% of our time is spent collaborating. We're, for the most part, not sitting at our desk, working on our task, checking off our checklists, and siloing ourselves. We're working with other people and collaborating to get something done. So why is Microsoft Teams the answer to that? The reason is it is a digital workplace platform where you can be communicating with your colleagues as well as working in one platform, in one application that you're opening on your computer. You can be working in SharePoint, you can be working on your files, you can be chatting, you can do calling, hold your meetings. This is all in one place, and it's organized in such a way that it makes it very easy to stay in touch and collaborate. So another example of a benefit of Teams that I like to talk about, because a lot of people think about Teams as the replacement for email because we've decided email is evil and we waste a lot of time writing emails, which is somewhat true, I think. Do I think Teams is going to replace email totally? No. But one example I like to give, information that would be lost in group emails is saved in Teams discussions. If you think about you get a new teammate that's coming on board that you just hired, and they're joined your team, and they have no idea what you've been working on the last year. They have no idea decisions that were made, documents that were done, processes that are in place. If you've been communicating with your team in Teams instead of in group emails, you can literally have them join the team, and now they can look through in context and see everything that has been decided. They can look at the files right there. They can see, if you've added other work products, since Teams connects with other tools, they could see what people are working on, and it just keeps everything in context. So that's why we care. That's why Microsoft Teams has been so popular. People are really seeing the benefits and the time saved. They're seeing an improvement in the quality of their work because people are really working together on things instead of emailing things around and adding comments but not actually discussing it. In Teams, you're actually communicating and working as if you're at a desk together. So why does governance planning matter? Well, to see those benefits, you really need to actually have a plan, and you need to think about some things through and have a governance plan for your Microsoft Teams implementation. When we think about SharePoint, what were some of our pitfalls as far as governance, and why did some organizations not ever really reach what was possible as far as collaboration? Well, because people created a whole ton of different sites and people weren't sure where to go to get work done. They had a few different sites they were part of. They didn't know, should I put files here? Should I put files there? The permissions became a mess. People broke inheritance, gave people document level permissions, so it became confusing. Will I be able to open this document? Will I not be able to open this document? Navigation, trying to navigate between different sites and lists and libraries could become cumbersome. Just different things, people adding branding and sandbox solutions that people weren't trained on and didn't know how to use. There was the governance and user adoption are so related that we have to think about them, or else we won't reach the success and we won't get the full value of these tools that we have. So you don't want to spend the time rolling out Microsoft Teams, not have any governance planning, not think it through, and then not get the user adoption that you need because people are confused, or people are worried about security issues, things like that. So when we think about governance, there's 3 keys to governance, because I think a lot of time people will look at the tool and say, what's possible as far as governance? And they lose sight of what are the actual goals. So what is the desired end state for your Microsoft Teams implementation? What does a successful deployment look like? To me, that looks like people are able to get their work done without barriers. Their data and files are safe. They're able to communicate with people who are outside of their organization when they need to, and basically able just to get their work done and save time and communicate with one another. That could be different for other organizations. They might only want to be using Teams for meetings and chat. They're not interested in the collaboration piece yet. You have to define your goals. And then what needs to happen to meet those goals? So what do we need to do? Are there configurations that we need to make underneath? You know, what do we need to train people? Do we need to set up and plan our information architecture to make sure that we're meeting our goals? Those are just some examples. And then roles. Who needs to do what to meet these goals? Who's going to take care of these tasks that need to happen and have ownership of these things? This doesn't need to be a super rigid, you know, over thought out thing. I think when we think about governance planning, and I've definitely been on those governance committees where it was so rigid that you couldn't get your work done, that is not what I'm here to preach today. I just think having a plan in place and having things a bit defined will really help you and help your teams roll out, be successful. So pitfalls that you're trying to avoid by having a governance plan, this kind of goes into, again, why it's important. You don't want to create so many teams that it causes confusion on where to do what. Again, this was a SharePoint pitfall that I saw with a lot of organizations, and I hate seeing it with Teams as well. Teams out of the box, if you turn it on, the standard setting is that anybody in your organization with a Teams license can create teams. So you have to think about that, and we're going to go into the Teams life cycle and how you can plan for that in your governance plan. If you have a ton of different teams, it's really confusing. If you make it too difficult to get a new team, people will stop and they'll find a different tool to use because they just want to get their work done. You don't want to lose content and frustrate people when people have already created all of these teams. They've started using them and sharing files and having conversations. And then after the fact, you kind of realize, whoa, I've got this wild SharePoint mess, or I've got this wild Teams mess with all these different teams and channels, and I see duplication where the same team is collaborating in 2 different teams. We need to clean this up. Well, the migration path in Teams isn't really a great story right now. You can move files between teams, but the conversations and meetings, those things cannot be moved. So you don't want to end up needing to split up teams and consolidate them, and then lose information and confuse people. So also failing to pay attention to features that Microsoft Teams has that might not be in compliance with your organization's regulations. So what do I mean by that? Teams is very configurable. There's a ton of different features when it comes to meetings, messaging, third-party applications. Pretty much a lot of the tools you can turn on or off. So if you just roll it out and leave everything on and don't even think about it, people will start to adopt it and use things. And then if you decide later on, oh, hey, you know what? People are using Teams meetings and we've already have this WebEx solution or this other Teams meeting solution, and we really wanted them to use that. Let's turn off meetings in Teams. You're going to really hurt your user adoption in that way. So thinking about it as early as possible. If you've already rolled out Teams and you haven't looked through the features and thought about what's in compliance or what might be duplication in tools, it's not too late, but doing it as early as possible, preferably before you roll it out, is best case scenario. And then confusion about calls and meetings. I actually added this bullet thanks to a very recent client that I have, because they rolled out Teams and they left calls and meetings on, and many of them did not have headsets. Many of them, they didn't have the audio conferencing licenses, so they were trying to be in a meeting room and using their laptops for the audio piece. They got all this echoing. They had a really bad time at first with meetings and how things would happen because they hadn't thought through what devices they're going to be using and how this is going to work when they're in different settings for their meetings. So that's what we're trying to avoid, because we want you to be successful and we want Teams to really help people because it has so much potential here. So roles, this is the first thing you want to think about when you're thinking about your team's governance. So some of the main roles that we see, there's the Office 365 admins, Teams admins, team owners, team members, champions, and support personnel. So Office 365 admins are usually a global admin, and they have the power to set policies and do things at the tenant level and make changes to your team's configurations. Teams admins also do. They just don't have access to all of the other admin centers in Office 365. Team owners are the people who are the owner of the teams. They have access to settings for the team and actually have quite a big impact on how team members will experience Teams in that one particular team. So then there's team members who are just users using the Teams. Champions, a lot of organizations have decided to have Teams champions. So people that are usually a little bit more tech savvy, people who are excited about collaboration and the digital workplace, who are going to be pioneers for your team's rollout, and often they become team owners. So team owners and champions sort of go hand in hand. They'll participate in pilots, they'll provide feedback, and they're really pushing in their business units or departments or projects to use Teams for different work functions. So it helps with your user adoption. It's something to think about if you're thinking about rolling out Teams, or if you're struggling currently with your user adoption of your Teams implementation. Support personnel, who's going to be the person answering questions when people have problems with Teams? It's surprising that this isn't thought about more by some of the clients that I've had. A lot of the time it'll end up becoming a help desk ticket or something like that, but sometimes having a team created just for team help, so that either your team champions or someone can be monitoring a team and watch if people are having problems. They can use Teams basically to help solve their problems in Teams is one idea we've been giving to our clients who don't want to have this all land on their help desk, because sometimes help desk can take a little while to answer questions, and people don't want this to hurt their their user adoption by having to wait to get the answers that they need. So defining roles, who are these people? Finding good team owners can be the hardest part. So one thing you can do is in the Teams Admin Center, there is a usage report. You can see who's using Teams the most and for what. Another thing is if you already have a SharePoint implementation, great SharePoint site owners will probably be great team owners. So the next thing you really need to think about is your team's life cycle. So this means, how is your team going to get created? Who's going to create it? Are you going to use templates? And then how will your team end? You know, you have this collaboration life cycle. You start your team, you work on your project's done, then what happens? So as I mentioned, if you use Teams as it comes with its standard setup and you don't change any of your configurations when you roll it out, anybody in your organization will be able to create teams. Is that a good idea or not? I'm going to go ahead and say that it's usually not a good idea, especially for the long run. It's a good way to get people to start using it because they can easily create a team, and in some ways, times people will use this as a way to bypass strict SharePoint governance because they say, okay, if I want to get a SharePoint site collection or a SharePoint site in my organization, I have to go through this whole process. Well, I could just create a team and I'll get a site collection that comes with my team because a whole SharePoint site collection is created when you create your team. So because of that, people may start using it more, they'll get familiar with it, they'll see the value, and that's one benefit of leaving an open Teams creation policy. However, your information architecture, your security, and in the long run, your user adoption may suffer because it could become very confusing because people are creating random teams and it leads to duplication, and if people have to think for more than a few minutes about where do I go to discuss this project, where do I go to work on this type of file, they're just not going to use it and they're just going to send an email. So these are things you need to think about. Organic teams is letting anyone create a team as they need them. Prescribed teams is thinking a little bit more logically about it and doing some forethought about, I think we need to have a team for each department, and then we're going to create channels for different work functions within that department. So channels in Microsoft Teams, in case you don't know, are a way of organizing your files and your communications through your channel messaging by a channel. So that if you're part of, for example, the human resources team, you could see all of this work around staffing, performance reviews, new employee onboarding. But if I don't do a new employee onboarding, I can kind of ignore that channel because it's separated from the rest of my work, and I could turn off notifications for that and not have to think about it. Another example is by project, creating a team for every project that your company has, or my company does it by client. We'll create a new team for every client, and then we'll add channels. So an example is project 1, we have channels for project management, communication, stakeholders, and user acceptance testing. It's a way to organize your work. And so now I have to go into my spiel about access in Teams. So access in Teams right now happens only at the team level. You decide who you want in your team, you decide if you want guests in your team, and they become team members. Well, there's this looming thing called private channels that's supposed to be coming, It actually just got pushed back again and is supposed to be released, I think, in November now. But that would give you the ability to cut access and set access at the channel level. So these are things you need to think about when you're wanting to organize your teams. Who do you want to have access to things? Who should have access to things? And who's working together to get something done? So the people who are working on project one are all part of that team. They're working to get something done. Should everyone see the project management stuff? If there's budget, things like that? If no, then this, for right now, the way Teams is, would need to be a separate team, because that's the only way to manage the permissions. So it's a little confusing, and it's extra confusing now trying to provide guidance, because knowing that these private channels are coming really changes the ball game. So just something to think about, and happy to answer questions. I don't know much about how that's going to be implemented yet by Microsoft, but happy to answer questions about that later on. So you want to have a plan for who's going to create teams. Are you really going to leave it open for everyone, or do you only want certain staff to do it? Some, have identified these teams champions who they know will do a good job, who they know will think through whether it makes sense to create a team for something, and they can be the people who are creating, along with Office 365 admins and Teams admins. So you do have the ability to only give that Teams creation to certain people. So are you going to have a request process? This is another thing to think about. Do you want people to fill out a form? Do you want them to just informally call or message someone, or do they need to put in a full help desk ticket if they want to have a team? Keeping in mind that if you slow it down and people can't get the team that they need to work, they're probably going to find another tool to go to. And then how are you going to name your teams? This can be done automatically using Azure P1 services. You can add a naming convention to your teams that can be done by different attributes that people have. So if the person creating it was part of a certain department, you could add that as a prefix to the team name. Or you can just have something informal where whoever's creating the teams knows this is the naming convention. Sometimes people want to specifically call out in the name if there's external guests from outside of the organization that are part of the team. Deciding if you're going to go the more prescribed team route, do you want to do it by department, division, work line? Looking at your org chart and thinking about who's actually collaborating will help you. And then are you going to allow just people to ad hoc need teamwork collaboration? So give them a team for some smaller initiative. So a little bit of guidance, you really shouldn't create a team. Obviously, when there's already an existing team or channel being used for that subject matter, a team should be created if people are working together on something. If they just need to dump files somewhere, creating a team is not the tool to use. You may want to use a SharePoint library, something like that, or OneDrive. If they need to co-author and discuss documents, because in Teams you can have live discussion and co-author, that's a good choice. Regular communication is key, because if you're not having regular communication about your work, you're probably not actually collaborating. Maybe someone's reviewing your files, but that doesn't necessarily need to happen in Teams if it's not regular communication. And if you want to use other applications and have them all in your team, you can add websites, you can add planner plans, you can add OneNote, and you use a lot of these tools as a team. Using a team to put them all there in one place is a great idea. Creating channels, same type of idea. Make sure that you're not creating something that already exists. And also thinking about the permissions aspect. If you're creating a channel in a team for right now, before private channels come, at least, everyone will be able to access that content. So if it's something secret that only a few people should see, it may need to be its own team, or just be, if it's just files you're sharing, use OneDrive, something like that.
Hey, Melissa.
Yes.
Would you say might another criteria be if you have a lot of remote people, just as far as staying in touch and making things easier to collaborate?
Yes, definitely. If you have a group of people that are working on something together that need to stay in touch and they're remote and won't be seeing each other in the office, it's definitely another.
Okay, cool.
All right. So you can set default team settings. So when a team is created, there's certain settings you can have be the default, and these are set at the admin level. So members actually get quite a few permissions to do things in your team. One thing you might want to note is that by default, team members can delete and restore channels. So deleting a channel means that takes away the files and the conversations. Yes, they can be restored, but do you want everybody who's a member of your team to be able to delete an entire channel? That's, I'd say, the one I really want to point out. But I just also, the point of me showing you this is so that you know that you can set these, you can set default settings for these. And also default settings for communication, like at mentioning. So the at mention settings are basically, can you actually, I think these are wrong right here, but at mentioning means that you're basically calling out either a person or a team, and they'll get a notification when you're sending them a message, a channel message. So you can change those default settings, and you can also change whether you want the GIF or stickers, or there's a content rating you can have for your stickers and GIFs so that they can be not adults. If you think your team's going to be naughty in what they're posting, you can change a content rating and have that be default for when a team is created. And that's basically done in a template, and that's where you're pre-building definitions for your teams, and you can include channels and apps as well. So you can have a pre-built template that is used every time a team is created. So then also having a plan for teams expiration and deletion, I would say this is probably less important as far as just getting up and going with Microsoft Teams. I definitely would say if you're having trouble deciding who's going to delete a team or the expiration schedule, or who's going to renew a team that gets that is going to expire. These things can come later on. It's just when you start working in teams so much, and you start, if you're creating teams for every project or every initiative, people are going to start to be a part of a ton of teams, and you're going to just start to have a ton of content. And if that project's already done, or if that initiative is already done, when is it appropriate to let a team expire? You can set automated expiration policies, again, using Azure P1, so that you can say after 2 years a team will expire, and then that doesn't mean boom, it's gone. It means that team owners and then Office 365 admins will get to decide, they'll get a notice, hey, this is going to expire, do you want to keep it? So those are things to think about, but those aren't, I would never delay a team's rollout waiting to make these decisions, because they sometimes, you have to start seeing how people are going to use it, and these can be figured out later on. You can also archive teams and set them to read only. So knowing that that can happen, and deciding who can request to do that, and also thinking about if you are going to archive a team, there will be files. What should happen with those files? Should you move them into a SharePoint archive library, or should you just leave them in their team and let them be there in read-only mode? So there's policies. This is the next thing you want to look at. because, again, you can change so many of the team settings and turn things on and off. You want to at least think about these things, and I'm going to go through them a little bit fast, but it's just what I want you to know from this is that you have the ability to turn things on and off, and you should know what all of these features are either before you roll them out, or if you've already rolled them out, you should find out now and try to get an idea for how your organization is already using Teams if you've already rolled it out. So permissions and security, by default, a team is set to private, meaning that you have to be invited to get into it. There is a concept of public teams, which anyone can discover and join from your organization. And then there's also organization-wide teams where you could have everyone from your organization be part of it automatically. So all of the same security-related principles of Office 365 apply to Teams, just so you know. So if you set DLP policies, they'll apply to Teams chat and Teams messages. So every channel gets an email address. The reason for that is because it's to help. So it's to help you reduce the amount of group email messages you have, because you could get a group email, or someone could send you an email that everyone from your team should know about. Instead of forwarding it on to everyone, you can forward it to a channel using your channel email address, and then it'll show up in a channel message. You can turn that off, because to some people, they see that as a security issue. Also, just so you know, anybody could email that address when they have it. So would anyone guess this weird email address that gets assigned? Probably not, because you don't get to pick like a nice pretty email address. It just gives you this strange email. But just so you know, unless you change this here under allow senders list, anybody from any organization could email that, and then it becomes a message in your team. External apps and cloud storage. So Teams can connect with other Office 365 apps as well as third-party apps. You can choose not to do that, not to allow them in. A lot of organizations I've seen will allow all of the Office 365 apps to connect with Teams, but nothing third-party. If you're going to add third-party apps, I would just say know what you're allowing in. Maybe do a little research. There is always possibility of a security risk, and you want to know what you're allowing into your environment. And also, besides storing your files in SharePoint, you can choose other cloud storage: Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, ShareFile. If your organization does not have those tools and you really don't want there to be any other storage, I would turn those all off, especially if you're just a one Office 365 shop using SharePoint and OneDrive for your file storage. I would turn all of those custom cloud storage settings off. For messaging, there's settings that you can have. So you can set it so that default users can't edit or delete their own messages. Some organizations want that because they don't want people to be screwing around writing messages and then deleting them, or if they go to leave the organization or something, deleting a bunch of messages. I would say that it's better to at least leave editing on, because if people write typos and stuff in their message and everyone can see it, it's kind of embarrassing. And if they can't edit it, it will hurt your user adoption, because people aren't going to want to use channel messages and collaborate like that, because it's, now I'm going to look stupid in front of everybody because I can't edit my message that has a bunch of typos. So don't change that unless you really have to, is always what I say. You can turn private chat off. I would only do that if you have some other chat tool that you really want people to use that people are used to, then maybe you do want to do that. And then also you can turn off the memes and stickers and GIFs and Some do that if they know they're going to primarily be using Teams with their clients added as guests or something, and they just don't want the silliness. But other than that, having those things really does help with collaboration and working with your teammates and having a good time, and it helps with user adoption as well. So calls and meetings, you also can turn off all of the various types of meetings. You can turn off private calling. If you've used Skype for Business, these are a lot of the Skype for Business type functionality. So Teams has a concept called channel meetings, where you schedule a channel meeting and that meeting kind of lives in that channel, and people will get a notification from that team that this meeting's happening in a channel. I actually recently had a client decide to turn that off because they thought it was misleading. Because when you create a meeting and you make it a channel meeting, it doesn't actually invite everybody that's part of that channel. It just makes it so they'll get a notification. It doesn't add a meeting invitation to their Outlook or even to their Teams meetings. So they thought that was really confusing because they were having people make these channel meetings thinking everyone from the channel would be invited and then no one showing up. And they decided that it was too confusing and to turn it off. So that was my first time experiencing that, but it's just something to think about. And again, that's also a good example of how how Teams governance is this fluid thing. It's not set it at the beginning and leave it alone. You need to be watching your usage and listening to your users and be a little bit fluid and make decisions based on what's working and what's not working. Another example, again, is if you've already spent a lot of time training and you've got a license for another meeting tool, you may not want people to use Teams. And external users, so you can, you have to be able to add guests into your teams. The admin has to turn that ability on, and then people can be added and be part of your team and work with you. They've got a few less capabilities, but for the most part, they're just like an active member of your team. But there's also this idea of, do you want everyone from other organizations to be able to send you chat messages? Because like in Skype, you can chat with people who are not part of your organization using Skype. You can turn that on or off with Teams. So if people are randomly getting messages on Teams from people in other organizations and wondering why, you probably have that turned on. So don't be surprised by that. And change management is a big thing. This is sort of related to governance. It's also just something I really wanted to talk about because this is one thing we're helping our clients a lot with. It's really tough to keep up with what's happening in Teams. Things are rolled out all the time. Some of the things rolled out have a really big impact on how people are using Microsoft Teams. So keeping up with that and having a plan for how to keep up with that, and then also how you're going to communicate that to your users. So watching the admin message center, watching the Teams roadmap, community blogs, these are ways to keep up with what's going to happen. But you also want to know that how you're going to communicate to your users. And it might be going to your champions first, because some of these things will have an impact and you'll want to be able to explain what that impact is. And then training. Training really is a part of governance because people should not be being team owners at the very least if they haven't been trained. If you decide to turn off Teams creation for everyone except for certain people, those people should be trained on when is it appropriate to create a team and why, and what all of the team settings are and how changing the team settings can impact usage. So for an example of team member training, how to access Teams, what channels are and how to use them, how to have private chat, group chats, access their files, attend meetings, what are the notifications and how to manage them. And team owner, again, how the team settings impact users and how to add or remove members, which is another important one. Team owners are basically in charge of the security of a team because they are the ones adding and removing members. And then support, having a plan in place for support. There is a Teams help button in the app, which a lot of people don't realize. But having some sort of portal or learning center with training materials is a good idea. Are you going to do help tickets? Are you going to have phone support? And then who will provide the support? These are things you would want to define as part of your governance plan. So I know I covered a lot. How about we open it up for questions, Sandy?
Sure. Thanks very much. That really gave us a lot to think about ways to allow people to do their work. Do you have a contact slide that you could put up while we're talking?
Yeah, sure, thanks. And I, the really thing I want you to leave with this is these are things I need to think about. These are, maybe you didn't know that you had the ability to change a lot of these settings, or hadn't thought about, maybe I could just have only some people in my organization creating teams. Mm-hmm. It gives you an idea of what to think about when you're thinking about governance.
Okay, great. So if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask Melissa, you can raise your hand in the GoToWebinar console. There's a little icon for that, and then I can unmute you and you can ask your question. So while we're waiting for people to do that, I just wanted to mention that from Lightning Tools perspective, we're really happy that we're friends with Melissa and we're able to get her on a webinar with us. We do offer SharePoint tools and web parts, and several of our new ones are able to be added as Teams tabs. So we're kind of in the Teams space also. So you can do things like have a structured discussion board within Teams. So within a Teams channel, you can add a tab for our Social Squared discussion forum. You could add a tab for our Lightning Conductor content rollup. So that would let you aggregate content from SharePoint or from Microsoft Graph and put that into a Teams tab. And also our data viewer web part can be a Teams tab, and that would let you show data from a SharePoint list or external data, and also do charting on that. So that might be of interest to people. Okay, awesome. I see Elizabeth has a question, so I'm going to unmute you. Hi, Elizabeth, how are you?
Good, thank you. Hey, Melissa, you mentioned earlier, I think it was Azure P1 naming conventions. Is that something available with an E3 license, or is that limited to E5?
I'm not 100% sure on that. I always get confused on what is part of E3 or E5. I can look really quick though.
I think not E3, because that's what I have. I think it's a separate thing, perhaps.
Yeah, well, let me get Elizabeth Adkins. Okay. I'm going to double check right now, but if I don't find it, I will get back to you on that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? I don't see any other raised hands. We have a couple minutes left. Did you want to show us anything in the admin center or anything like that, Melissa? Or I guess you had screenshots, but.
Right, well, yeah, let me do that. If I can, there we go. Okay, are you still seeing my screen?
Yep.
All right. So we talked about, I guess, what to do for your team's governance and what to think about. We didn't talk a lot about how. So let me go into the Teams Admin Center. and show you a little bit around here. Okay, so the Teams Admin Center in the scheme of things is actually pretty new. When I was writing my book, it wasn't there at all, really. So it's really remarkable to see how much better it is now that there's this central place to manage your teams, manage your users, and manage your team's policies, which is what you do in the Teams Admin Center. You have to be a Teams admin or in Office 365 Global Admin to be able to get to this. So if you aren't able to, then you probably are not one. Looks like I'm spinning here, but so if you go here, and there's this whole left navigation, actually kind of reminds me of the Teams app in a way. You can go to Manage Teams, and you can see all of the teams that are part of your organization. You can see the membership, and you can actually make changes. So you can change the membership, and you could change the settings to that team if you wanted. So if I clicked on sales, I could click on edit. I could change the team name. I could change the privacy. I could make this a public team. And I could change whether or not team members can edit or delete their messages. And I could do that. I could change channel stuff. But this wasn't what I was talking about when I was talking about setting policies. So this is doing it on a team for team basis, which is great to have that ability. But if I needed to set a policy, what I would do is, like, for example, messaging policies.
So then these are global settings, correct?
Yes, these are global settings, or you can apply it to only certain users. So if there was some users where, for whatever reason, because of their job, they shouldn't be using chat, you could take away that ability just for certain users. And you can also do it based on an Office 365 group that they're in. If you want to do it by group, though, you need to know PowerShell. That's the only way to like create a policy that applies to just one Office 365 group. So I'll show you the global settings that I could change. So here, owners can delete sent messages, users can delete. I could change these and then save, and that'll change it for all of the teams. It'll change it globally in my tenant. And you can create new policies. So again, like if I wanted to create one that's gonna just apply to some users or maybe maybe some user went through and deleted a bunch of messages or something, or did something appropriate, like, okay, you're losing that ability. I could take it away and create this special policy, can't delete messages, and then create it, and then what I would do is I would go into, so I'm not going to actually do it because I don't want to screw up my environment, but I would go to here and go to users, and this is where I would apply that to certain users. So this is actually my brother, so I'll pick him, and I would edit his settings. This is where I do it. Yeah. So here's I would pick a different messaging policy for him. I would pick this, can't delete policy. So then he wouldn't be able to delete his messages. So you have a lot of control at a pretty granular level. When you want to start doing things at the group level, from what I've found is that you need to start knowing PowerShell to do that kind of stuff. And if you want to only give access to create teams to a certain group, the only way I've found to do it is through PowerShell. But a lot of the things you can do, just by clicking and setting settings. So that's pretty cool. Any questions here?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any. So that's really helpful information. So
yeah. The other great thing I guess I should show too is usage reports. If you want to know who is using your teams and which teams are being used. You can select these different reports. So teams usage will show you all of your different teams and how many active users you have, and how many channel messages and things like that they're doing in your team. Teams users activity will show you which users you have that are being really active in teams. And using this report is a good way to find teams champions. Because if you see someone who's like way using teams, writing a ton of channel messages, chat messages, then they might be a good person to try to bring on as a teams champion.
Oh, that's a great tip.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of new stuff in there since the last time I looked at this. So that's really helpful just to see that. And as you say, there are things changing all the time that you need to use those methods that you mentioned to keep up with.
Well, and here's this like an org-wide external access. So this is whether you want people to be able to contact you from outside of your organization. If you turn it off, then you can add just, oh, I only want people from this company, this domain to be able to talk with us, those types of things. So that's something to think about if you're an organization that has pretty strict security regulations or things like that. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I think I'll wrap it up. So thank you very much, Melissa, for being our guest today. And this webinar has been recorded, and it will be available on the Lightning Tools site within the next few days, probably early next week. And then we'll let people know about that. So yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone that joined. I hope you have a great day.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.